The air was heavy, smelling of fresh earth and lilies. I stood by my mother's graveside, feeling completely empty. It was the hardest day of my life. Just as the priest finished his final words, my phone started buzzing wildly in my pocket. I knew I should ignore it, but it wouldn't stop. Finally, I pulled it out. It was Director Calvin Rudd. I answered, stepping away from the small group of mourners. His voice was cold and sharp. "Since you're not committed enough to show up today, Evan," he said, not even mentioning my mother, "you're terminated. Effective immediately." My hand shook so badly the phone almost fell. I stammered, trying to remind him my compassionate leave was approved. He just hung up with a click. I walked back to the mourners, feeling dizzy. My Aunt Maria rushed to me as I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. As I stared at the name on the tombstone, my phone buzzed again with a notification, an unread HR email time-stamped during the funeral service. I finally pulled myself together and went through the HR email. It was a formal termination notice. The stated reason was job abandonment. I felt a jolt of disbelief mixed with fresh rage. I looked for the paperwork I had filed a week ago, the official, approved request for compassionate leave, but it was nowhere to be found in my company email. It was like it had never existed. They had erased my approved absence to make it look like I simply skipped work. I called the HR department immediately, demanding an explanation. The woman who answered sounded nervous and mechanical. Before I could finish saying that Calvin Rudd was lying, she cut me off, saying, "The decision is final," and then the line went dead. They hung up on me. My chest tightened with betrayal. My decade of loyalty meant nothing. I sank onto my living room couch, defeated. But just then, my phone chimed again. A coworker's secret text popped up. "Check your inbox." I sent something. "Don't reply." My hands shook as I opened my personal email and found the attachment from my coworker. It was a series of screenshots taken from a manager's group chat. The time stamps were from yesterday. In the chat, Calvin Rudd was celebrating my firing. He wrote, "Finally got rid of the dead weight," and another manager joked, "Good riddance to the funeral guy." The sheer malice made my stomach churn. They weren't just firing me, they were reveling in my pain. I read the comments over and over. They called me unnecessary baggage, and spoke about using my newly finished project to justify a new, younger hire. The humiliation was overwhelming, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had picked the wrong person to treat this way. They had violated a sacred boundary. I looked at the screenshots again. This was more than enough proof of wrongdoing. I was still figuring out what to do next when my phone rang. It was Mira Chen, the union representative. She sounded extremely urgent. I answered Myra's call, and before I could speak, she exploded with fury. "Evan, what is going on? I personally approved your compassionate leave request last week. It was signed by both HR and Calvin. This termination is completely illegal." I told her about the HR email and the erased leave request. She confirmed she still had her copy of the signed approval. She calmed down a little and lowered her voice. Mira revealed that Calvin had a history of this. She said he often pushed people out, especially older employees or those who took extended medical or family leave. But every time, the victims had no evidence. They were too scared or too shocked to fight back. They tried to pay them off, and they took the money, she said. But I was different. I had the evidence, the text, the email, and now the screenshot showing his celebration. Myra's voice grew firm. She told me to protect those files like they were gold. I knew then I wasn't fighting alone. Mira asked me to meet her tomorrow, adding, "You need to see something in person." The next day, I met Mira at a neutral coffee shop far from the office. She looked worried but determined. She laid out a stack of anonymous reports on the table. "These are from the union archives," she whispered. I began reading them. The pattern was horrifying. There was a single mother who had been bullied for leaving work exactly at 5 p.m. Another employee was denied critical medical leave until he almost collapsed. Several reports detailed how anyone who mentioned safety violations or spoke up against Calvin was quickly fired or retaliated against. Calvin was systematically creating a toxic, dangerous workplace. He had a playbook for destroying people's lives. My own experience was just one small part of his cruelty. As I flipped through the final pages, I noticed something strange. One report mentioned Calvin sending sensitive internal documents to a private email address. The address was crud@private-consulting.com. I recognized the name immediately. I stared at the email address, my heart pounding. C. Rudd. I quickly pulled up my old company directory on my personal tablet. There it was. Charles Rudd, Vice President in the West Coast Logistics Division. Charles was Calvin's older brother. This wasn't just a random act of malice, it was nepotism and protection all wrapped up together. Calvin wasn't just clearing dead weight, he was clearing the way for his brother, or people who would benefit his brother. It was a coordinated purge. I realized they probably planned to give my large, important project to Charles's team and then claim all the credit. My firing was a stepping stone for the Rudd family business plan. The thought made my anger burn even hotter. I was just a casualty in their power play. I told Mira what I realized. She looked shocked. This changes everything, Evan. This is a family operation. I left the cafe knowing I needed more than just HR files. As I walked to my car, my phone vibrated. A voicemail from an unknown number. The voice was a whisper. I have proof. But we can't talk here. I'll text you a location. The anonymous person texted me a location. The far end of the public park's parking lot, near a grove of tall oak trees. I waited anxiously. A few minutes later, a young woman approached my car, clutching a small purse. It was Layla Quinn, one of the data analysts from my old floor. She looked terrified, constantly scanning the surroundings. She quickly got in. Calvin is insane, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's been deleting sensitive communications for weeks. She revealed she had copied the files just in case. She pulled a small USB drive from her purse and pushed it into my hand. It has the threads he deleted, the real conversations about all the firings, not just yours. But if anyone knows I gave this to you, I'm done. My family needs this job. I promised to protect her identity, my voice thick with gratitude. Just as she finished speaking, her eyes went wide. Oh no, she breathed. She spotted a black SUV with tinted windows slowly pulling into the lot. Security, she hissed. Layla scrambled out of my car and disappeared into the trees as the SUV approached. I quickly started my engine and rushed out of the parking lot. Safe at home, I plugged Layla's USB drive into my personal computer. The files were encrypted, but with a password Layla had whispered to me. I opened the main folder and gasped. It contained months of deleted emails. They showed Calvin had indeed planned my firing weeks before my mother even became sick, long before my compassionate leave. Request. He timed it perfectly to happen just after I finished coding my latest project. The emails confirmed his plan. Use my project as a success story, give the management role to his brother Charles, and collect a large internal bonus for streamlining the department. It was a complete setup. One particular email sent from Calvin to Charles caught my eye. It mentioned a reporter's name, Serena Holt, and ended with a chilling line, "We can spin the story if needed." I already have a narrative prepared for the press. The realization hit me. Calvin was planning to publicly smear me after my firing to ensure no one questioned his actions. He was trying to control the narrative. The moment I saw the reporter's name, Serena Holt, I searched for her online. She was an investigative journalist known for tough stories on corporate corruption. I found her professional email address and wrote a carefully worded message. I told her I was the recently fired Evan Morales, and I mentioned Calvin's plan to spin the story. I included a very small, harmless snippet of the deleted email thread as proof I wasn't just a crank. She replied within the hour. Serena said she remembered Calvin well. She revealed that Calvin had threatened her newspaper with a lawsuit a few years ago when they ran a small, unflattering piece about his division. She was definitely interested, but she said that the deleted emails, while powerful, could still be dismissed as personal grievances. She needed undeniable proof of Calvin's official wrongdoing. "Do you have access to the project logs?" she asked. "The logs that show who accessed and approved things. That's the real evidence." I knew the project logs were the final piece of evidence I needed. They would show Calvin's original approval of my leave and the financial transactions tied to my work. Mira and I drove to the company headquarters, hoping to use her union access to retrieve the logs. But when we got there, the server room was surrounded by new layers of security. Heavy-duty locks, new cameras, and a huge sign restricting access. As we tried to approach the entrance, a new security guard stepped out. He was enormous, wearing a clean, crisp uniform. He demanded credentials, even from Mira, the union representative. He was very strict, refusing to let us pass. I felt a wave of despair. We were so close. Just as he turned his back to scan Mira's badge, he quickly slipped a small, folded piece of paper into my hand. My heart leapt. I quickly tucked the note into my pocket. It read, "I know what they're doing. Midnight. Come alone. South entrance." I arrived at the south entrance of the building exactly at midnight. I was nervous and alone. The guard from earlier, Rafael Ortiz, was waiting. He was standing by a service door, looking stressed. Rafael whispered that he hated Calvin. He had seen too many good people treated unfairly and was sick of watching it happen. He agreed to let me in to get the logs, but only for exactly 5 minutes. "If I'm caught, I lose everything," he stressed. I nodded, promising to be quick. He opened the heavy door, and I rushed inside. I navigated the quiet, dark halls to the server room. I connected my USB and quickly pulled the massive log files. A quick search showed a crucial entry: my approved leave request, signed digitally by Calvin Rudd himself. This proved he signed it, then later deleted it from the system. I had the smoking gun. Just as the transfer finished, a beam of light cut across the hallway outside the server room door. Footsteps approached, echoing loudly. It was Calvin himself, walking toward the server room. Raphael acted fast. He started loudly rattling a large metal trash bin near the front desk, making as much noise as possible. The noise distracted Calvin. Calvin stopped in the hallway and shouted, "Who's there? What are you doing?" Raphael, pretending to be searching for something, gave me a precious 30 seconds to slip out the back exit near the loading dock. I ran out into the cool night air, clutching the USB drive. Raphael had saved me from being caught red-handed. I sent him a quick text, thanking him and promising his help would not be forgotten. He replied almost immediately, "Be careful, Evan. He's planning something big for next week. Something that will make you look very bad." His warning made me uneasy. I knew Calvin was not going to stop. I got home just after 1 a.m., exhausted but victorious. I finally had all the evidence. As I put the USB drive away, my phone pinged with a new email from Calvin: "Return your company laptop immediately to security. Failure to comply will result in a police report." Calvin's demand for the laptop was a trap. He wanted to wipe the machine clean of any email history or files I might still have access to. But he was too late. I spent the rest of the night carefully cloning the entire hard drive onto an external backup. I then did a deep search through the laptop's archived files. I found more than I ever expected. Hidden deep within the finance folders were confidential documents that detailed inflated project expenses. I saw how Calvin used my major projects as a cover to drastically overspend on third-party vendors who seemed to be giving him huge kickbacks. This wasn't just simple workplace toxicity anymore. This was financial misconduct, and it was tied directly to my projects. He was using the success of my work to embezzle funds. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Calvin didn't just want my job, he wanted to use my reputation as a shield for his crimes. I immediately forwarded one of the most damning emails to Mira. She called instantly, her voice panicked, even on my answering machine. I picked up the phone. Mira was breathing heavily. "Evan, those numbers. I recognize that vendor, Apex Solutions. We thought the project overruns were due to honest mismanagement, but look at the figures. He charged the company 3 times the market rate for basic routing software, and then blamed the extra cost on unexpected labor, meaning the people he fired." She confirmed my worst fears. Calvin used my project reports to mask his own theft. He had embezzled a huge amount of company money and then fired the project team, including me, to cover his tracks. "This is no longer just an HR issue, Evan," Mira said grimly. "This is criminal fraud. He could face jail time." We both knew the stakes had just gone through the roof. We had to move fast and be completely coordinated. I was planning my next steps when my phone rang again. It was Serena Holt, the journalist. It was 2 a.m., but she sounded breathless. "The story is bigger than we thought," she whispered. "I have confirmation that the company's former CFO was pressured to sign off on those exact expense reports. You're holding the key to a massive cover-up." Serena's editor had given her the go-ahead. The story was a huge exposé on Calvin Rudd and the toxic culture of corporate crime and retaliation he created. But she needed an official source. "I can hide my sources like Layla, but for a story this size, I need an on-the-record source, Evan," she said. "I need you to be the face of the story. The person who tells the truth." She explained that having me speak publicly would force the board and the union to act immediately. But it would also put a massive target on my back. I hesitated. I was already exhausted, and the thought of being public scared me. I told her I needed a day to think about it. Just as I hung up, my younger sister, Sophia, rushed into my apartment, tears streaming down her face. In her shaking hands was a folded piece of paper. "Look what I found," she cried, "in the mailbox." It was a threatening letter. The paper was cheap, and the letters were cut and pasted from magazines. The threat was short and chilling. It read, "Stop, or your mother's resting place won't be so peaceful. This is your only warning." My blood turned to ice. They were threatening my mother's grave. This was no longer about a job or money, it was a personal and dangerous attack. Calvin had crossed every line of decency. I looked at Sophia, who was terrified, and I immediately knew my decision. I would fight back. I would be the face of the story. I would bring him down. This evil had to end. I hugged my sister, telling her we would be safe. Just as I reassured her, my phone buzzed with a text from Raphael, the security guard who helped me. He wrote, "You were right. They're watching you. I saw one of Calvin's senior managers near your street today. Be careful what you do next." The text solidified my fear. They were desperate, and they were ready to do anything to silence me. I immediately took the threatening letter to the police station. Mira met me there to ensure everything was done properly. We filed a detailed police report, including the evidence of the wrongful termination and Calvin's history of retaliation. We handed the letter over to the detective. I watched as they carefully dusted the paper for fingerprints. Later that afternoon, the detective called me back. He sounded grim. The prints match a senior HR manager named Robert Lane. He is known to be very loyal to Mr. Rudd. This confirmed my suspicions. The threat came directly from Calvin's inner circle. The detective looked me straight in the eye. "Mr. Morales, this goes beyond a typical workplace dispute. This is now a criminal intimidation case. Would you be willing to testify if we proceed with charges against Mr. Lane and potentially his boss?" I did not hesitate. "Yes," I said, "I will testify. I have all the evidence you need." As news of the police report started to spread through the company's grapevine, I received a surprise call. It was Gerald Whitford, a long-retired, respected member of the company's original board of directors. He had heard whispers about the turmoil and Calvin's excessive behavior. Gerald said he was disgusted by what he was hearing, especially the firing during the funeral. He said he wanted to help me. Gerald revealed that Calvin was already on thin ice with the current board. The recent loss of key contracts due to system instability and the sudden departure of experienced engineers had already made the board question Calvin's leadership. "The board hates scandals, Evan," he said. "They hate bad press and criminal investigations even more. They will move quickly if the evidence is undeniable." He stressed that if I had everything to prove financial fraud and retaliation, the board would have no choice but to remove Calvin. Gerald asked me for everything you've got. The time for waiting was over. Evan, Mira, and Serena worked through the night, assembling the mountain of evidence into one clear, devastating file. We named it the Rudd dossier. It was organized professionally, with clear sections, the deleted email threads showing planned termination, the fraudulent financial transactions tied to my project, the proof of nepotism involving his brother Charles, the police report on the grave threat, the wrongful termination documents, and a list of safety violations Calvin had deliberately covered up. The evidence was overwhelming. It painted a complete picture of a corrupt director who used his position for personal gain and malice. Mira suddenly got an anonymous tip, likely from Raphael or another sympathetic employee. Calvin was hosting an all-hands leadership meeting tomorrow morning. He planned to announce that I was terminated for ethical breaches and poor performance, officially smearing my name to the whole company. We had to beat him to the punch. Myra's tip gave us a narrow window to act. We couldn't wait for the newspaper to print. We had to intercept Calvin's lie before he could even speak it. We decided on a simultaneous mass distribution. We split the master file, the Rudd dossier, into two parts, the evidence of fraud and the evidence of retaliation. I drafted a short, powerful cover letter that simply stated the truth, backed by the documents. We sent the fraud evidence to the board of directors and the Attorney General's office. At the exact same minute, we sent the retaliation and union violations evidence to the union leadership and to Serena Holt. Serena called me just as the emails finished sending. She was ecstatic. "It's printing in tomorrow's headline, Evan. Our sources confirm the Attorney General is already looking into the fraud allegations." It's done. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of triumph and fear. The dominoes were now falling, and there was no way to stop them. I was at home watching the clock, waiting for news. Calvin's leadership meeting was starting right then. Mira was on standby, ready to head to the office if things went south. Suddenly, my phone started buzzing with texts from former colleagues. One of them, still inside the building, was live texting me what was happening. Calvin stood at the front of the room, starting his prepared speech, slandering my name. Evan Morales was let go for ethical breaches and incompetence, he began. Then, all at once, every executive's phone in the room started buzzing and flashing. The subject line of the email was hard to ignore. An executive, Mouth Agape, stood up and read the text of the email aloud. Director Calvin Rudd under investigation for fraud, retaliation, and harassment. The room erupted into absolute chaos. People were shouting, reading the files, and pointing at Calvin. My coworker texted, "He is bright red. He's leaving." Calvin threw his notes onto the floor and stormed out of the conference room, screaming my name down the hallway. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. An emergency board session was called that afternoon. Gerald Whitford, the retired board member, ensured I was invited to speak privately. I walked into the grand, intimidating boardroom and sat across from a dozen stunned, serious faces. I didn't get angry, I remained calm. I presented the evidence I had collected, the deleted leave approval, the police report, the financial fraud files. I spoke calmly and professionally, with every claim backed by a document they held in their hands. They were horrified, passing the documents around in silence. One woman, a longtime director, simply shook her head in disbelief. I wasn't just presenting a grievance, I was presenting a clear case of criminal enterprise. The board members thanked me for my integrity and for coming forward. They informed me that Calvin Rudd would be immediately suspended and barred from the premises pending a full external audit. The very next morning, the board made its move. The company officially fired Calvin Rudd for cause. A full internal and external investigation was opened into the financial fraud allegations. Charles Rudd, Calvin's brother, was quickly demoted and transferred to a minor role thousands of miles away. The HR staff and managers involved in the conspiracy were escorted out of the building by security. Serena Holt published the final, crushing exposé in the newspaper, with my calm, resolute face on the front page. I was no longer the humiliated, quiet employee, I was a symbol of workplace justice. My phone didn't stop ringing all day. It was a complete house cleaning. Later that afternoon, the board chairman called me. He apologized profusely for what I had endured. He then asked, "Evan, what do you want next? How can we make this right?" I could have demanded a massive settlement, a corner office, or Calvin's job. But my mother's values, fairness and dignity, were more important. I told the board I did not want reinstatement or a promotion. Instead, I presented a clear plan, a complete overhaul of the union and employee protection policies. I negotiated for an independent ombudsman who could check HR corruption, stronger protection for whistleblowers, and a zero-tolerance policy for nepotism. I wanted a legacy that ensured no other employee would ever suffer as I had. The board, desperate to avoid further scandal, agreed to all my terms unanimously. The chairman, relieved, sighed, "You have saved this company, Evan." After the final papers were signed, Mira called me. Her voice was full of excitement. "You won't believe this," she said. "Someone wants to meet you outside the building." I walked outside, and my eyes welled up. Standing there was a crowd of people. It was Raphael, Layla, and dozens of my coworkers, many of the people I hadn't seen since my firing. They were smiling, cheering, and clapping. They thanked me for saving their jobs, for giving them a voice, and for fighting for their rights and their future. Raphael came forward and simply handed me a flower. Layla looked relieved, her eyes shining with gratitude. I was overwhelmed by the sheer, unbridled support. In that moment, surrounded by the people I had protected, I finally let myself break down and grieve my mother without shame. I knew she would be proud of what I had done. I whispered softly, "This was for you, Mom." The crowd quieted as I wiped my eyes. I walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. Later that night, I received one final letter. It was from the Attorney General's office. The letter stated they were officially opening a full criminal case against Calvin Rudd for fraud and intimidation. Justice was only beginning.